So just be aware that there is a recording taking place right now. Again, good morning. Thank you for being with us. We are fortunate this morning to have Dr. Scott Hunt, the Executive Director of Field Relations at the Ohio Department of Education, with us. I reached out to the department, and Dr. Hunt was gracious enough not only to speak with me, but said he would address our affiliated group here. We at the ESC have received some questions about the remote learning pathway considerations chart, about remote learning and virtual learning in the future. And so we're going straight to the source. So again, Dr. Hunt, thank you for being with us this morning. Thank you for addressing the group. In addition to the attendance link that is in the chat box, also, I'm going to send out right now the link for that pathways considerations chart, so you have that as well. If you would make sure you register your attendance via the link, we would appreciate that. And without any further ado, I'm going to turn the meeting over to Dr. Hunt. And again, we appreciate you being here.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay, Dan. Good. Okay. So Dan, just real quick overview. This is your group is primarily curriculum instruction folks.
Yes, as I'm looking here, we have curriculum instruction, but we also have some superintendents, assistant superintendents, some EMIS individuals. So you have a little bit of a mix.
Good, good. Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. I apologize. I don't have a slide deck or slides to present, so I'm going to try to talk through some things with you here this morning. But first, let me start first by I'll give a little intro and background on my role at the department, what I do, and where I've been. So most of you I've not met, and I'm going to make sure that at least you know that I can be a go-to for you when these kinds of questions come up. So as Dan said, Scott Hunt, I'm the Executive Director of Field Relations at the department. I've been with the department for about 2 years. So prior to that, I was superintendent at Cardinal Local Schools in Geauga County. I was there for 6 years as superintendent. Prior to that, I live in Northeast Ohio in Lake County. I live in Perry. It's the one with the power plant. So if you see a glow or a third eye or gills or something, that's probably why. I was 15 years at Perry. I was the Director of College and Career Readiness. I was a middle school principal for 5 years, high school assistant for 5 years, and a high school counselor for 4. Prior to coming to Perry, I taught for 4 years in Beechwood City. I was at Cleveland Metropolitan for a year. I taught middle school and started my career in sunny Naples, Florida. I taught 5th grade there for 4 years. So I make sure that I share the background because as somebody who is overseeing field relations, it's important for you to know that I've been where you're at, and I certainly can empathize and sympathize with what you are having to deal with in light of the pandemic. And so with that, I'd like to make sure that I also thank you on behalf of the department for all the hard work that you're doing for the kids across this state. I know it's been a challenging year for everyone, especially those of you who end up probably doing the bulk of the work in your districts around curriculum, instruction, and assessment. It's important work. You know, keep your chin up. Hopefully there's some light here at the end of the tunnel moving forward. Vaccines are rolling out. Graduation's coming up. Maybe you'll get a summer. I'm not sure. But we're certainly going to be ready and geared up to open back up in the fall. And it might look a little bit different. So first, let me go back to the beginning of the pandemic. As you are all very well aware, when we started out and the governor ordered the closure, everyone was scrambling. No one knew exactly what to do because there was nothing in place over that long weekend for you to really pivot into any kind of a remote setting. So we know districts were scrambling, and I can tell you that this runs through my office. The pathways, the blended learning declarations, et cetera, remote learning plans. So I know that we shared with the field in March or April of last year that everyone should submit a blended learning declaration so that you had some cover for when you pivoted into this kind of remote setting. Well, we got about 900 of those blended learning declarations. Typically, we get 5 or 7 each year for districts that are really looking at a blended model, because there are some specific things that you need to address if you have a blended model. Shortly thereafter, House Bill 164 was put in place, and the provisions in House Bill 164 created the pathway for the remote learning plan. And we strongly encourage districts to rescind their blended declaration and pivot into this remote learning plan. So the remote learning plan basically provided the cover that you needed in order to embed a remote pathway into your district, most especially for those districts who were fully remote for quite some time. Allowed you to kind of be exempt from the hourly requirements of the school year and a variety of other things, a great deal of flexibility. Well, in June of this year, that House Bill 164 and the provisions therein expire. And so I know that you've had the burning questions because we've received them. So what are we supposed to do when we're planning for the fall? And I can tell you, sitting at a district level seat, that I know what you're doing from February until the end of the year. You're planning, you're doing your course catalogs, you're approving your resources, your budget, your allocations for staffing. So we know all of those things are taking place. And so we know it's important that you have at least in your head a way to plan forward, given that we're still in the pandemic. So we got the burning question. First and foremost was, are we allowed to stay in this remote? So can we have a remote pathway? Can we do remote learning next year? And I guess the short answer to that is yes, you can. I can tell you, and I know many of you are doing this. You were doing it before the pandemic. I was doing it as a middle school principal 15 years ago through the Virtual Learning Academy, where I had students online to do either credit recovery, or there was an issue with a student issue or a medical issue that we plugged kids in online. Did it at Cardinal Local Schools so that I could keep students in my district so that they wouldn't re-enroll elsewhere. So we have remote pathways. So districts can do this, and yes, you can continue to do this. And so that would be first and foremost. I'm sure that, yeah, you're allowed to continue in offering some kind of a remote pathway. And so we answered that question. Then, of course, we got the question. So, can you provide us, what is it that we can look to when we're starting to build this pathway moving forward? So I'm going to stop there real quick and kind of pedal back on House Bill 164. So there's been some internal work at the district, like a co-facilitated group for several months around the whole concept of remote learning. So short term, we have these provisions in House Bill 164. And I learned last week that our policy and legislative team has been working with a couple of legislators to make sure that we get some extension around the provisions in House Bill 164, which would be the remote learning plan opportunity and the flexibility with the remote learning plans. Now, I will tell you, there's nothing legislated at this point that would permit a district to submit a remote learning plan. I think Senator Brenner has drafted some language to the effect that would do so. And so that would be short term, but we're also looking at this as long term. One thing that we've learned, and I'm sure that you've learned, is that we can't go back to what it was, nor should we. We have a real opportunity here moving forward. And so as you're thinking about what the future looks like, I'm certain you're getting requests from either a small or maybe a large percentage of your population of parents and students saying, I want a remote pathway. I'm thriving in this environment. How can you accommodate this? So there's also a long-term piece of this, and I'm not sure what that might shake out to look like, but short-term, we'd like to see an extension for next year. Hopefully we'll get that, not sure, but I know that in June, it's too late. You're already planned for the fall. But if those provisions are in place, that will still provide you with some flexibility. And there's a long-term piece here in terms of how can, what is the policy framework, guardrails for schools moving forward to continue down this pathway to offer some sort of remote learning opportunity. And then, of course, I'll throw in blizzard bags. There is, if you can pivot to a remote setting and you have enough time before the blizzard hits, you can pivot into something remote for your students, given that you have the capability with technology devices and whatnot to do that pivot. So 3 things there that are kind of happening simultaneously, 2 which are longer term. So I think what I'll do is I'm going to point to a couple of things. I don't know how many of you have been to the department website, but I'm going to drop in a link, and I see Dan has done so as well in terms of the pathway document. If you've not been to our reset and restart page, I would encourage you to look at that. There are a ton of resources there that we've either co-designed with stakeholders throughout the state, or that we found to be useful resources for you to use in the field. So I've dropped that link in there. And then I'm also going to drop the link into the chat box that takes you to the web page for the remote considerations. Embedded in that page is a link that Dan has dropped in there that actually shows the chart. So I would encourage you to look at those items as you continue in your discussions. All right, so I'm going to pivot into the pathways document. So I want to again highlight the word considerations. The department is not directing anybody to use any one of these pathways. They are considerations for a district to consider as they're building their pathway into next year or for the future. I say this because it is really not the department's role, given that we are a local control state, to kind of dictate what that looks like. That has to be up to the board and the superintendent, administrators, and teachers to determine what is best for the students and families that they're serving. So they are considerations, but each one of them come with some specific things that you might have to do if you choose that pathway. And we also say and strongly encourage that you work with your board council to make sure that whatever you compliance issues or requirements that you must submit to. Again, we're not going to tell you that. You have to do that at the local level. So in that document, there are 4 pathways. So I'm going to take a moment and just kind of describe each one. So we've gotten a lot of questions about, can I set up an alternative school with a different IRN or something along those lines? And you can. But look closely at the alternative school pathway. That is very specific to a population of students that you'd be serving. And although it might provide you the opportunity to have a remote pathway, it may not provide you with the flexibility that you're looking for as you develop whatever delivery mechanism that you are looking at. The blended learning declarations. You can still do a blended learning declaration. And again, I would ask you to make sure that you read closely what is required of the blended learning declaration, what you have to do to submit that declaration, and the time frame in which you do it. And then I would also point out that there have been some questions about this whole idea around time. And when you look at the chart, it's on the second page at the top. There's no specific requirement regarding the amount of time required in a supervised physical location away from home. I've gotten some questions about, what does that mean if I'm blended? Do I have to be in school half-time and at home half-time? What does that look like? So whatever you may consider, if you're looking at a blended declaration, there's no specific time requirement for either. It's actually pretty vague in terms of the description around time, but just know that part of the time, some amount of time, it has to be in a supervised location. Most people will call that the school, the brick and mortar school. And the other portion of that time would be elsewhere, either at home or where I like to work, at your local Panera, and you could do your work from there. The third option or pathway that you might consider is around credit flexibility. And again, this might not provide flexibility K through 12, but certainly for your 7 through 12 students, credit flexibility has been on the books for quite some time. Now, let me say this about Credit Flex. Credit Flex is very personalized and customized to meet an individual student's needs. It is not something you would pull together and say, I've got a Credit Flex pathway that's remote. Now, you may have that for an individual student, in which in their plan you might provide the credit requirements through a course or 2 courses, and the pathway to get there is going to be a remote platform. But you would have to write that into a plan around the Credit Flex for that student in order to accomplish that. Now, I will say this, and Montgomery County ESC, and Dan, I could float you some of these documents that I have from them if you don't have them. But the Montgomery County ESC is working kind of as the ESC remote platform hub for their districts. And they are going to employ Credit Flex as a means to place students in their program. They have a template that they're using, that would look very similar for students that are going to be in their program through the ESC, that they would use to customize and personalize per student for Credit Flex. And other districts are doing this on their own platform and their own buildings. But if there is some consortium or partner work around this, that might be a consideration moving forward. And then finally, the last pathway, which is again very specific, and I'll talk a little bit about that, the Innovative Education Pilot Program. Now, this is an application for an exemption or waiver of something that creates a barrier in law or in rule that would prevent you from implementing an innovation potentially around remote learning. Now, I will say this, the application's been open since March and closes in 2 days. So unless you're really on top of that particular pathway, this may not be something that you would pursue. And I'll give you an example of this, just because I think it's important, because this may be a pathway that you look at next year. So I always use Butler Tech. Butler Tech last year, prior to the pandemic, their board passed a resolution that they were going to do this 5th day program in which students would attend school 4 days a week. And on the 5th day, they would have a variety of opportunities, not only for students, but for teachers. So they'd have workforce planning and development work, college credit plus, other student experiences, and staff professional development. Well, the law says you have to be in school 5 days a week. And so going to a 4-day schedule for them would be out of compliance with the law. So they did an Innovative Education Pilot Program waiver to get around that law so that they can implement this 5th day program. And so I say for that particular pathway, it's very specific to an innovation. There's no money attached to it. It's not a grant. It's just a way for a district to do something innovative. And potentially in a remote setting. And by the way, Butler Tech is going to add a remote pathway for their 5th day program through this Innovative Education Pilot application waiver. Those do go through my office. We have a team that will do a legal review and a content review, and then we either approve or disapprove the application. So those are the 4 pathways, Dan. I've talked a lot already. I'm going to stop because there may be items that I can either answer questions or find answers for you.
Does anyone have any questions about the specific pathways? I'm going to throw one thing out, Dr. Hunt. I know when you and I spoke on the phone, one of the questions that's been coming in is, and you alluded to this, are we able to just go back to what we did pre-pandemic? We had those virtual opportunities for our students. So do we have to go down these pathways, or can't we just go back and make sure that things are coded correctly in EMIS, but we still have those options? So that's been the biggest question that we've been getting. So if you can kind of maybe go into a little more detail about that aspect.
Yeah, yeah. And so when I started out, I said, that's kind of been the burning question. And look, I get it. I'm a rule follower too. I want to make sure that I'm doing what I'm supposed to do, that I'm complying with what I'm supposed to comply with. But that question has come up. Can we do this remote learning next year? And the answer is yes, you can, because you probably were doing it prior to the pandemic. As long as you are doing it in a way in which you're able to track your students' attendance, make sure that they're engaged in classroom activity, that they're doing their work, then yes, you can. And I know not only have I shared this, but I know State Superintendent Paula DeMaria has said, look, nobody is going to send out the virtual academy police next year. We know that districts have engaged in this type of work prior to the pandemic, that those who haven't are looking to create remote pathways moving forward, and that we're still in the middle of a pandemic. Look, if something happens over the summer and we have to close, which I don't think will happen, but if we did, we've got to be ready to make that pivot again. And so, we're not out of the woods yet. So we still want to make sure that we have the pathways in place, that you can still continue to do the things that you intend to do. And so I would tell you, yeah, you can continue in the way that you have. There's nothing in the law that says you're required to do this in this manner, and there's nothing in the law that says that you can't do this in this manner.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
We're fortunate right now to have Dr. Hunt with us, so this is our time to ask questions. Feel free to use the chat feature, raise your virtual hand, or simply unmute, however you would like to do that. But this is our time with Dr. Hunt, and I encourage anyone with a question or looking for some clarification to go ahead and ask that at this point.
You just mentioned that it is not in law that we do have something like this in place. However, we're hearing buzz that it may become law. Is there any validity to that?
So, yes, one of the things that we're working on, and I facilitated a group of stakeholders prior to the new year around this very topic about remote pathways. And so we have the short-term look with remote learning plans and trying to get through a pandemic, and then there's a long-term look around remote pathways or remote learning, or whatever that umbrella terminology may be, including the elimination of blizzard bags. So for the short term, it's really kind of late to have anything useful at this point in terms of remote learning plans, although I think it still may come here June, July, because there are a couple of legislators that are interested in making sure that there is a pathway for schools. Now, we don't get to weigh in too heavily on what those parameters and guardrails are, but we've provided many with a pretty informed look at what this should look like. So potentially there could be some legislation around what remote learning looks like in the future. Yes. And I think we would expect to see something here. I'm just not sure when. Does that answer your question, Demi?
Yes, thank you.
Dave Pilati?
Yes, Dr. Hunt, do you anticipate the possibility of any legislation that mandates that districts offer remote learning?
I'm not sure that it would be mandated. Again, what we have advocated for in the work that we've done internally is that districts should have this should be local control. You shouldn't be mandated to do. You have to do this based on your local population, the needs of your community and students, and so I would hope that any kind of legislation would have the words may instead of shall. You may offer this, but there may be some shalls in the guardrails, like you shall do it in this way, but you may offer an option that is remote.
Thank you.
Dan, if you don't mind, I want to kind of pivot into some other work that's happening around this that I'd like to share. Over the last couple of months, John Richard, who's our deputy superintendent, has run kind of side by side what we're calling our next steps meetings. And I think we've posted some of that documentation on the reset page. I think there's a document there called Journey to the Next Summit. That being said, we have a kind of a core group of a couple of state board members and some superintendents in one group, and then our state associations, OEA, OFT, the Superintendents Association, Principals Associations, talking about the future of what this could look like. And so we've tried to share pretty enthusiastically that, look, we have a real opportunity here coming out of the pandemic to make some transformation in the way we deliver education to students. And so we are talking about things, whether it's remote or not, but we are talking about things specific to personalized competency-based learning. And I know you folks that are curriculum and superintendents know and understand kind of what that means. It is a real transformation from currently what we do. We believe that time should be the variable here, not the constant. That the location of the delivery of educational programming should be the variable. There are instances throughout the state where we're hearing students that they've been the primary oversight for siblings at home, and they work a job to help support the family. And so school for them looks a little different, and an option for them to be able to still learn, meet the requirements in a competency-based model for that learning, that can happen at any time, at any place. And so we're really trying to wrap around those concepts about personalized competency-based education. And when it comes to attendance, what we're really talking about access and engagement of our students. So how do we provide access and how do we keep them engaged? And these are the things that we're hoping folks in the field will embrace. Going back to what it was is just not feasible. This pandemic has really kind of changed the face, and we have a real opportunity, we think, to be innovative in our thinking and to really transform. And we can talk that talk, and we should talk that talk from a department perspective, but we know that happens boots on the ground in your districts. And so we're going to encourage that kind of discussion as you look forward. It'd be so easy just to regress and go back to what it was. But we have a real opportunity to really kind of set the tone because that incorporates a whole lot of things that people talk about in the field, from accountability to state testing, et cetera. And those ought to be things that you are considering as you plan for the future and as you think about what it is your students need and how you can get them what they need and meet their needs along the way. I'm happy to hear any thoughts on those ideas as well. So, Dan, I'll stop talking again.
Thanks for giving us some insight as to some of the other conversation and work at the department right now, and what lies ahead for us as opportunities as well. Any questions at all for Dr. Hunt? Well, Dr. Hunt, I just want to say again, on behalf of all of us, thank you for your time today. Thank you for providing some clarification, not only around these possible pathways for consideration, but just in general moving forward as we plan for instruction next year and a remote or virtual option. And then again, the insight that you just provided with regard to what lies ahead in education in Ohio. So I do appreciate it. I know everyone else here appreciates your time as well. Should we have any other questions that come along, I will be sure to pass those on to you. And I think I also heard you at the beginning. Individuals are welcome to reach out to you as well if they have a question that they want to ask of you directly.
I'm going to drop my email in the chat. So feel free to email. Happy to get back to you. If I don't have an answer, I'll find out for you.
Wonderful. Well, again, thank you for your time, everyone. Thank you for your time. Don't forget, we have ILC meeting next week. So if I don't talk with you before, I will see many of you next week at our ILC meeting. So thank you, everyone. Take care and keep us posted with any needs you have. Thank you.